Welcome back to the Busy Bariatrics podcast. And on today's episode, we have Kim Tirapelle. Kim is a registered dietitian who specializes in bariatric sports nutrition. She's been working with bariatric clients and athletes for the last 17 years and has worked in inpatient and outpatient clinic settings, a bariatric surgical center, and also served as a collegiate sports dietitian for a Division I university. She's also a certified specialist in sports dietetics. Kim took her passions of sports nutrition, bariatric nutrition, and combined those areas to fill a void for active bariatric individuals who have fitness goals but do not know how to adjust their nutrition to match their needs. In 2022, Kim opened her private practice, Active Bariatric Nutrition, where she works virtually one-to-one with her clients to optimize their nutrition to meet their training goals. You can also listen to Kim on her weekly podcast, the Active Bariatric Nutrition Podcast. Personally, Kim really unlocked probably the toughest part of my journey, which was I'm doing everything at all the times, and I did not know how to put it all together. So I'm so excited to have her come in. And for this episode, we are going to specifically talk about probably my biggest hurdle when it came to nutrition. That was incorporating carbs after weight loss surgery. But I've been talking nonstop. She's been nodding politely. Kim, how are you today?
Hey, I'm good. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's exciting to have you on. And like I said, I feel like it was just yesterday, but now looking at it, we're about 2 years ago. I remember when Kim's podcast first came out and I finally had everything click and was like, this makes perfect sense. I never heard such a thoughtful and insightful explanation of what you needed to do after bariatric surgery, as well as nutrition. So what inspired you to really work in the bariatric community and to kind of, help us out with all this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of it, I will say, comes from personal. I have very close family members that have always, struggled with the disease of obesity, and it was always present in our lives, my life growing up. And, so it was always something that I was kind of, you know, I didn't understand how I could help, until I decided at some point, hey, I'm going to become a registered dietitian and see what I can do, and if I can help my family and other people, that would be great. So when I actually went back to school to be a dietitian, my very first position was an inpatient job where I worked at a hospital and I covered the bariatric floor. So I was doing the surgical, basically the discharge education. And I did that for a couple of years and realized that I wish I had more a chance to, work with these people longer term, instead of just being like, here's your discharge paperwork, eat some protein, see ya, good luck to you. And this was a long time ago. Yeah, this was, 17 years ago. So things have changed, in terms of education. But I then took—
Surprisingly, not much in 12 years since then.
Yeah, yeah. And, I ended up moving into an outpatient position where I worked in as the outpatient dietitian for bariatric surgical centers. And in that time as well, I worked with athletes as I was a Division I collegiate athlete, or well, I was myself, but I also worked as the team dietitian here at Fresno State. So I had an opportunity to work in two areas of, my personal interest, which was I covered, bariatrics for a long time. I covered, athletes. And what I found was when I was in that outpatient position, people always ask me hey, I've lost all this weight. What can I do to help with muscle gaining? What can I do to fuel this half marathon I want to start training for? And there really wasn't anyone out there talking about it, didn't know anything about it. There's not a lot of research for it. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to utilize the sports nutrition guidelines that I've been trained in, for someone that hasn't had bariatric surgery, and see how we can overlay those into someone that's had bariatric surgery and how we can adjust the nutrition. So that's how I open up my practice. But it's been great because I feel like it's a real needed area that, really needs some information.
There's two parts I want to go on with that. And I think where I really found the most benefit of working with you is I think a lot of the time surgical centers, because they have to have such a high volume of people that are there really isn't the time and attention that each bariatric patient has. And that's really a product of the system more so than the surgical centers and even big hospitals that have everything. It's because there's so many that are on. It can be difficult. And I think that's where working with registered dietitians makes a big difference, because when I started to work with you, just the fact that you would ask me questions of what my goals were like, what did you want to do, how did lifestyle go? And I felt that was one of the first times I really had someone who was willing to sit and listen, but then also take all of that into consideration when building a plan for myself and for so many other people. So what are some things you kind of need to understand when you start to work with a bariatric patient to get a better idea of how to fuel their nutrition and their goals?
Yeah. Well, the basics, when I'm working with someone is I have to understand, what amount of movement they're doing. What are their goals in terms of their training and fitness goals? How many days a week are they working out? What intensity level? What duration? Because those factors all impact then developing the nutrition goals for that individual person. And as I always tell people, there's different cycles that you're going to go through throughout the year. You're going to have different needs throughout the year as your goals change and as your training changes. So that's important to know, because sometimes people think, okay, I have my macros, I'm just going to stick to this for life. And it's like, no, those are going to change quite a bit. And even, within a couple month time, they may need to change, depending upon what you're doing for, your workouts. So those are really kind of the starting goals. And of course, just understanding where they're coming in at, what information do they want to learn more about, where they're at with, nutrition information that they know of right now and what they're implementing, and just being able to establish like how to set habits and how to kind of just start making those very small minor changes to get them moving in the direction that they're wanting to head. So I usually start with kind of assessing those things first.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I think that's where we get a lot of it wrong when it comes to nutrition after bariatric surgery, is this idea of like, these are your macros, this is almost like written in stone, and that it stays forever kind of at this set point. What are some of the things that like we should be looking for when we're adjusting our macros or looking to kind of figure out that reason season that works best for us?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess first I would say is again, understanding if you're in a goal of, hey, I'm trying to build muscle. Are we in a kind of a muscle building phase? That's where we need to look at, maybe we need to increase, overall calories, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, etc. Are we in an endurance training cycle where carbohydrates are really important for fueling longer training sessions that are at moderate to high intensity levels? Or even folks that do HIIT workouts and shorter, more explosive types of workouts, those too will need, a little bit more consideration around carbohydrates. So it really comes down to determining, what are your goals? Are you in a building phase? Are we wanting to lean out a little bit? That's going to start making some changes in terms of overall caloric needs. And then the macros that make up those calories, we can shift each one to kind of help based on what that goal is. So it's not, there's not one answer, because each situation will have a little bit of a different tweak to the calorie and the macro information that you need.
And that I think is so important for people to understand, is like, yes, you can absolutely go get like a energy calculator or figure out your basal metabolic rate on your own, but it really is just the science of it. But I think that was where working with you really shined, that there is an art to understanding what is the actual needs of the person. Where does the psychology come from? How do you kind of incorporate and balance all that? And I think that was really the most powerful part for me. But I will say the scariest part for me was when we did start to build the plan, and why I wanted to bring you on was incorporating carbs. As a bariatric patient, I think we are given a very clear message of protein is the highest priority, and that carbs and fats can sometimes fall to the wayside. Why are carbs so important after bariatric surgery, and how can we start incorporating them in a proper manner?
Yeah. I mean, I agree that yes, protein is going to be paramount, especially for someone that's had bariatric surgery, because overall your energy intake is reduced as compared to someone that hasn't. And so we want to prioritize protein so that we can maintain muscle, we can maintain hormone function and immune system function. We need amino acids for protein. But carbohydrates begin to play an important role because, number one, as we move forward in life, we want to incorporate a more well-balanced diet. We don't want to just eat only protein, which we're somewhat kind of relegated to in those first several months, because that's really all we can tolerate. And so that's why that's kind of, the protein is the focus. But as we move forward, the balance of intake is important. But number two is for someone that has, active, if they have training goals, fitness goals, no matter what it is, carbohydrates are the main energy source of our muscle tissue at moderate to high intensity levels. Okay. Your body can only primarily break down carbohydrate as an energy source at moderate to high intensity levels. And so we want to start incorporating those in small amounts. And as when I work with someone, I think a big thing, and you and I, of course, you were a little farther out when we first started. So it wasn't like you were right out where we're just starting to kind of reintroduce. But based on where you are as a person in terms of your phase after surgery, we can start to make some gradual increases in carbohydrates. We can start by just trying to fuel around the workouts to see if that is helpful. We can also then then look at your total overall daily intake at each meal and snack. Where can we pop in some carbohydrates? Because again, it's going to help with fueling a workout. And then of course, I will say too, it's also helpful for recovery. So when we go and we work out and we push ourselves, right, our body is using that carbohydrate that we have stored in the muscle tissue, and that's called glycogen. We break that down. And so we need to put that back into the tank so that we can do this again tomorrow. And so we kind of get into this cycle of like, hey, I need carbs to work out, but then, maybe we forget the importance of putting them back in after we get that workout in and kind of being consistent. So they do play a very critical role, especially for folks that have activity goals, no matter if it's muscle or endurance training. Carbs are very important for helping get through those workouts.
And I think it's like so important that we cover that. Like it is such a nuanced thing. And it's like, I feel like we have to give so many different pretexts in this because someone who's like 1 month post-op is going to have a totally different experience as someone like me who came in at like pretty much a year into maintenance. So almost 2 years post-op. And, between age, what are you actually physically doing and everything else? It's such a tough question to just blanket answer. So
Right.
I think it's important that we get to that. The other part that I think was really cool was this idea that when we think of carb loading or carbs before our workouts, I always go back to the episode of The Office where Michael is going to run like a 5K. So he like eats like the whole thing of, oh God, what is Alfredo? Like he eats like a
Yes.
pound of Alfredo and I get physically sick looking at it. What are the difference between like complex, simple carbs? How do we kind of incorporate them? And why are all carbs pretty much not equal, but like, why are we not eating Alfredo before we go run like a half marathon?
Yeah. Well, because it's important. So carbohydrates, they do digest quickly in general, especially the simple carbohydrates. So depending upon the time you have before a workout is going to determine which type of carbohydrate and how much. So if you're farther out and it's like, let's say you're not working out until the afternoon, you can have more of those complex whole grain carbohydrates, which are going to have more fiber. And fiber in terms of digestion and emptying out of the stomach, it takes longer. And so it sits in there longer. So we don't want to have big, heavy meals that have high carb, like complex carbohydrates like fiber or high fat before a meal, or right before, a workout, because they'll sit in there and they'll make us feel really full. As we get closer to the start of the workout, this is where the volume of your overall intake, as well as the type of carbohydrate, meaning we want to lean more towards those simple carbs that are going to digest more rapidly. We want to rely on those because they're going to break down more quickly and be available to the muscles so that we can fuel our workout. So for example, if you're 3 to 4 hours out, you can have a more balanced meal that has protein and whole grains and maybe even a little bit of fat and some fiber. That's okay. Once we get within about 1 to 2 hours prior to a workout, this is where those simple carbohydrates, and I always use the examples of things like applesauce, bananas, you could do toast, you could do a waffle if you wanted to, you could do fruit or fruit snacks, things like that are quicker to digest. Of course, there's sports nutrition products out there too that you can utilize, sports drinks, etc. Those are going to get into the muscle and into the bloodstream, number one, more rapidly so that we can fuel our workouts. So there's a little bit of a strategy there with what type of carbohydrate and when and how much, depending upon when your workout is.
Yeah, and I think that was always the coolest part with me because I had to work out at like 5 a.m. because the rest of my day is kind of a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
I can't necessarily be like, okay, well, 2 to 4 hours before my workout is like at 3 a.m. I'm not setting an alarm. So it's really finding like the nuance and what works for you. And what I always appreciated was you really take an approach of almost a simplistic answer for the solution, which I like. Of a lot of the answers you would give me didn't necessarily have to be shipped over the country. I could walk into a grocery store and outright get it like an apple or a banana and really get it. Why is there so much complexity when it comes to like carbs and like early like workouts for everything?
Well, I think it's because, like you said, the struggle that folks think of as like, hey, I don't want to have something. Number one, I got to get up super early. I'm already like, this is hard. Now I've got to think about, I really shouldn't be eating and drinking together, right? I'm supposed to separate food and drink. Well, how would I get something to eat if I'm going to be carrying this fluid bottle to my workout at 6 a.m.? I don't want to get up, an extra 30 minutes ahead of time to eat. So it becomes a lot of the balance. But when we think about, okay, what are some just fast and easy things that you might consider, even if it's just a swig of sports drink, something like that that has a little bit of carbohydrate, or a squirt of an applesauce pouch, or a couple bites of a banana, that can work. The other strategy I tell folks is if you're like, listen, it's not happening. I am not getting up to eat, period, or I take hypothyroid medication. This is not happening. Okay, great. where can we get carbs in the rest of the day? Because we're still filling up that tank so that when you go to work out the following day, you have it. So another strategy would be the night before, making sure that both at dinner, but also maybe a nighttime snack could have some source of carbohydrate. And that can help you to fuel really early morning workouts.
I think that was probably my favorite game changer for me was this idea of let's take a little bit of the math out of it at 4:30 in the morning
Totally.
because like I'm barely getting my pants on. Nonetheless, like, okay, it's 30 minutes from here and now I need to like drink this now and like
Right.
I have to do like 3 circles around and then pray to like a rice cake.
Right.
I think like it just was so much easier for me of I'm going to have a super high carb meal at the end of every night. And it's kind of become my tried and true as my schedule's gotten busier is I just really enjoy having like a big hearty either Italian dish or something as simple as beef and rice for my last meal over and over again and then kind of doing my workout fasted. And I haven't really noticed much difference one way or another of like I had like a rice cake with some honey on it at like 4:30 in the morning. I'm now Popeye and PRing. Why do people kind of struggle with that comprehension of like that the clock resets with our macros every day, if
Yeah.
that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's just because we just have these certain numbers we're trying to target and we're trying to fit them all in. And, in terms of like, let me just go back to like you're saying when you eat something, you don't feel like Popeye. Well, it's because of the consistency, though. The consistency to your commitment to eating throughout the day, every day, even if you don't have something right before the workout, it doesn't mean that like that's going to be the most, terrible workout. Now, certainly what I would say is it really kind of depends on the type of workout, the intensity level. Cause I'll have some folks that are like, hey, if I don't have like even just a couple squirts of an applesauce pouch before I go to a HIIT workout that's high intensity, or I'm going for a run in the morning, I really do notice a difference. And so just having those little bit can help. But again, I think it's just about, we're all trying to wrap our brains about, okay, we're trying to aim for a certain amount of carbs and protein. We're doing the best that we can. And so what I would say is start with where you're at. Let's try to focus on the meals that we, can get in, that we can plan for. And then in the morning, it might be something that you just start with something really small if you can and you want to try it. That's fine. And if not, then let's make sure that the rest of the day and maybe the night before we try to optimize some carbohydrate intake.
I think that's why working with a registered dietitian does make a world of a difference because like if people listen to this episode, I really hope they get out of it not just the importance of carbs, but like there's no clear like this is the dogmatic way of how you have to do it. You need to work with someone who is listening to you. And also I think like a part that gets left on the table from every aspect of coaching is you have to kind of give registered dietitians and coaches feedback. So what are the best ways that you kind of collect feedback from your clients? Like, are you looking more at data? Is it more feel? Is it a little bit of both? Does it depend on the client? D, all of the above. Did I just answer the question for you? I'm
D, all
realizing.
the above. But I'll just
Good.
add to that, which is, again, it depends on how that person feels comfortable with, how they track things. Like, so I have clients that don't want to track, and that's okay. We can look at the plate method. We can adjust our plates based on what our goals are. Again, shifting carbohydrate content based on what we're doing for training. And it really just depends on where they're at with what they're trying to work towards and, how they want to make change, how they like feedback. So in general, I work with my clients. We have, a lot of online communication, of course. Some of my folks that do keep a log, of course, they're tracking their food intake. I also ask them to put in like comments how they're feeling, because that tells me too, I'm listening more, not just to what you're eating and how much, but how you're feeling later in the day, your mood. Are you waking up kind of sore and tired all the time? I'll give you an example. I've had several clients who they work out super early in the morning, and by mid-morning, they start feeling really weak and sometimes even maybe dizzy, or like they're like, I feel like I might faint or something like that. Well, those are big red flags that something is off, right? Yeah. It's
Circle
like,
that
whoa,
and kind of be like, we need to know.
we need to, yeah, those are things. So it's not just about what you're eating and how much. It's about the timing, how you're feeling, your energy, how you're recovering, how you're sleeping. If our sleep is disrupted too, that can be a signal that something's off with our nutrition and our workouts. Something is not in balance there in terms of adequate fueling. Maybe we're overtraining. So those are things that I ask my folks to please send me updates. So most of my folks, we talk daily, but at the very least, we have weekly check-ins where we're, hey, how are things going? And again, based on what their goals are, there may be other things that I'm looking at as well.
I will say I always like the responsiveness when we work together of I could pretty much tell you like, yes, my life is a dumpster fire right now, but the nutrition's good. Or,
Yeah.
like I'm literally dead right now and moving forward. And I think it's important that there is some sort of dialogue on that feedback, whether it be lifting on my end or the nutrition on your end of how do we feel and how are we recovering? Now, I
Yeah.
know we're supposed to like stick in the carb zone, but can we just kind of talk about like how sleep is such an important
Yeah.
factor
Yeah.
as far as, letting our bodies recover, but also what role nutrition can kind of play in sleep?
So important. So, when we sleep, growth hormone is released when we're sleeping. That is helpful for muscle building, muscle protein synthesis. So for folks that are, maybe you went through that rapid weight loss phase, we've lost some muscle as well as, overall body fat too. We want to, put that back on. So sleeping is so important because both of our brain and our muscles, everything is kind of healing, recovering. We're kind of cleaning out the junk that's kind of accrued during the day, and we're getting, a fresh start for the next day. So it's so important too for just energy levels and feeling like you can kind of make it through the day, and we're not just feeling like groggy and kind of out of it the whole time. So it's really important for folks that, are trying to change body composition specifically, but also for those that are, just putting in day-to-day workouts that want to see results. It's really important because it's helpful for recovery and muscle protein synthesis.
And I think also like having active rest days plays a big part of that. But if a client's really struggling with sleeping, what are some things that you kind of look for, kind of poke around of how do we handle it from a nutritional standpoint? Do we go more supplemental? Or is it like also you need a bedtime and you need to shut off?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I would say before we get into nutrition, I would say certainly look at those kind of bedtime habits, which is, are we kind of shutting down electronics and the blue light and the kind of the stimulation? Do you have like a set kind of routine in terms of your hours of sleep? I'm actually going to be having a sleep specialist on my podcast here shortly. And I know she speaks specifically about, trying to stay within certain times that you go to bed and wake up because it's helpful for our body to stay in that kind of a rhythm. But nutritionally, I would say if you're having issues, sleeping, I would look at a couple things. If you're having issues falling asleep or staying asleep, let's look at caffeine. Are we having it too late in the day? It does take a long time. I believe the half-life of caffeine is about 6 to 8 hours. So based on when you have had your last cup, it takes at least 6 to 8 hours just to get in or to break that down. So if it's still kind of circulating in the body, it can be a central nervous system stimulant, which can prevent us from getting into those sleep cycles. So I'd look at caffeine, but I'd also look at, our workouts in terms of, are we fueling adequately for the workouts that we're doing? Are we taking in adequate, number one, calories? Are we taking in protein and adequate carbohydrates? Because again, if we're not fueling our muscles, they're trying to heal. You're breaking down, and that is a stress on the body, and it can really impact your sleep as well. So, and then I would look too at like dehydration. Are we dehydrated before we go to sleep? I know a lot of folks don't want to drink right before bed. That's fair, but like throughout the day, are we staying hydrated? Again, things that are important for people that are working out, but it's helpful for sleep too. So, there's lots of things we can look at in terms of nutrition, but I would just say those would be some of the main things if we're looking at as it's related to like our workouts and things like that, because they are related.
It's amazing how like I've gotten to a certain age where the phrase like you can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning has rapidly changed what that means and how
Yeah.
it kind of implements
Yeah.
in my life. But like I think it's a lot of what you teach of if you have some consistency and start to really build in these habits of I'm eating like a balanced amount of carbs throughout the day, I'm using moderation on my plates, I'm hitting my water goals, I'm separating between a lot of those, kind of when you put these habits together, it really does align so much of your process. Have you noticed from a nutrition standpoint, most clients seem to struggle getting that last piece in place?
I think it's just, I think consistency is a key piece just to staying on whatever this goal is. And right, what I always say then is let's look back at the goal. Is it realistic? Do we need to kind of figure out if the goal was too big to take on?
I'm 2 weeks post-op. Can I run a marathon next
Yes.
week?
It's
And
like,
it comes
yeah.
all the time of like, please no.
Yeah, let's maybe dial that down a minute and let's maybe start even more basic. But, I would just say it's like, I think folks just kind of oftentimes we are afraid that we're going to make a mistake, right? So then it kind of like analysis paralysis is what I say in
Mhm.
a lot of things that I do. And so it's like, oh my gosh, should I be eating that many carbs? Okay, well, maybe I shouldn't. And so then we don't have it. Or, oh, we read something on the internet and it said, I should be eating X amount of carbs or no carbs or, whatever it is. And there's so much just noise out there. And I feel like getting professional guidance and help where you can have someone that can give you feedback where they can say, is this okay? Am I on the right track? Awesome. Great. Give feedback, work with someone that can kind of work with you day to day and kind of make adjustments. But I would just say, honestly, the biggest struggle I see again, especially with my folks is that fear of the carbohydrates. And is it going to, cause some weight regain? Is it an issue? If I start lifting, what happens to the number on the scale goes up? Is that bad? You know what I mean? And so I think those can be, something that's of a concern for folks. And so when you're working with someone that says, hey, I've worked with lots of people, we kind of know how this goes and we can kind of set some realistic goals, we can get folks moving in a positive direction.
And I think that's all like so many important things that go right in there with what I wanted to talk about is when we start to incorporate carbs, there is a tendency for the scale to go up. Why should we not be as panicked as the scale may be showing when we are starting to weight lift, starting to incorporate carbs, kind of put it all together?
Yeah, totally. So first off, I'd say, the scale isn't necessarily the best indicator of progress, right? Because, if we really want to see the true progress, we might consider doing body composition measurements. Even circumference measurements can give us some, some kind of feedback, but body composition is going to give us a bigger, more robust picture of what's happening in the different compartments in our body, right? So we've got the body fat, we've got bone, we've got lean tissue, we've got water. So there's lots of compartments that when you get on the scale, it's just the total, right? So we don't know what's going up or down within those things. So when we eat carbohydrates or when we start strength training, a lot of times, number one, with eating carbohydrates, we actually draw in also water. When we store carbohydrate in the muscle as glycogen, we also bring in about 3 to 4 grams of water weight with it. And so, of course, then if you're starting to gradually incorporate a little bit more carbohydrate in the diet, it's completely normal to see maybe a little bit of an increase on the scale if that's what you're using because of the water retention, right? And some changes there. And that's okay. You need those carbs stored in there so that you can get the most out of your workouts, right? And then also I would say too, when we're building muscle, if you have a hard workout, or for example, like I had someone recently just ran a half marathon and she saw a lot of water retention after the race. It's like, wait a minute, I just ran. How could I be gaining weight when I ran 13 miles? Your body is healing, right? All those little small muscle fiber tears that you're experiencing through endurance training or through hard lifting sessions, your body draws water in as well. So those are some of the kind of superficial, changes that we see day to day that really, it doesn't mean that you're gaining body fat. It's just that that water is coming in for a reason. And so I think we get kind of over focused on that number on the scale, and really it may not be a bad thing at all. It might be a wonderful thing that is helpful for you in order to reach this end goal that you have.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to kind of like, not fully detach from the scale, but absolutely do what you're saying of like, make sure you have all your data points together. I think a lot of the times we see people who naturally are like, yes, I just ran 13 miles. Why is the weight up? And it's like, no, your muscles are inflamed, but you also have to get like everything else kind of aligned and together too. So there's a lot that goes on that kind of figures that out. So if a client's really afraid of starting with carbs, how do you kind of like gently ease them in? Because I feel like there's twofold of this, and we'll start with like, how do you gently ease someone in who might be afraid to add?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first off, I would say, in terms of if they're afraid, are you ready do you want to make a change right now? Is this an okay time? Because if they're so afraid that, maybe it's just not the right time, with, they've got other things going on, who knows? So let's make sure that we have a little bit of wiggle room there to try some new things. And I would start very small. So I might just say, okay, at what meal or snack do you feel like maybe you're feeling a little bit more hungry? Is it after a workout, or maybe the meal a couple hours after a workout? Do you feel a little bit more hungry then? Yeah, I do. Okay. Well, besides after you eat your protein, this is where we might just try an extra 15 grams, which is just one serving of maybe that's fruit or some vegetable or some whole grain. It doesn't mean every person has to add the whole grain. I think when people aren't as afraid, in my opinion, and when I work with folks, we're not as afraid of fruits and vegetables, which, by the way, have carbohydrates, as compared to rice and bread and pasta. And those kind of get a bad rap, so to speak. But if you don't want to start with those, that's okay. We can start adding in carbohydrates from fruits or vegetables. We can add in beans. We can add in yogurt, soy-based products if that's what you enjoy. And then we can start trying maybe some of those whole grains if you're ready. So again, it comes down to meeting a client with where they're at, making one small change that they feel comfortable with. And once we get that momentum going, then we might try it somewhere else, maybe in the pre-workout window, or we add it at another meal. But again, I always tell folks, start small. just a 15 to up to 30 gram increment increase before we go anywhere else.
I think that's so important because I think also from a data perspective, when we're changing if we're turning too many dials at once,
Right.
it's really tough to tell what's driving the result, which is
Yes.
why, on a twofold of that, like for one, it's like, yeah, let's slowly start to incorporate carbs and then like give it like 2 weeks and just see how it's going, as opposed to we're going to completely rehaul our sleep regimen. We're going to adjust our workouts and lifts. We're going to like incorporate carbs. When you have all these knobs being turned at the same time, you can't really tell what's driving any change, in my personal opinion, from that.
Yeah. No, I
But
agree
it's
with you.
also like to yes end as well of it's why working with a registered dietitian or professional, it takes time. Like this isn't the McDonald's drive through where I rolled up to Kim and was like, yo, I need my macros and I need them for bulk cut maintenance. And if you could give them to me yesterday and I'm never going to talk to you again. It really is an art and a science of learning your client, understanding the process, and then really looking at like these small incremental changes.
Yeah. And I was just going to say too, and showing people how to do that, because there's a lot of folks that really just don't know, what foods have carbs, what foods have protein, what foods have fat, which ones are the best to have. Like we were talking about simple, easy to digest carbohydrates versus more of those complex carbohydrates that have more fiber. Which ones am I supposed to be having? There's a lot of kind of maybe confusion or not understanding that. So again, starting with where they're at and going, okay, let's just start here. These are the carb foods. This is the best time. And this is how we balance the plate, and just showing that sometimes and writing it out or creating a schedule for someone. I schedule with my folks just to help them see visually. This is what I'm going to be eating. This is when I'll be drinking. This is when I'm taking my vitamins. This is when I'm taking my hypothyroid medication, and we write out a schedule so we can visually see when these things are going to happen. And that can be a really helpful tool as well.
I think especially just for adults as a whole, calendar creation, I always say is like the biggest driver of success, because when I work with a client, whether it could be like for lifting or any other aspects with their bariatric journey, it really comes down to, do you have the time to do this? And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. And it's like, show me on your calendar. And I
Right.
always kind of then see like, no, you don't have time for 5 workouts. Let's scale back to 3, take some time to put nutrition compliance into place and do everything. And it really is like probably the most underrated tool in your bariatric journey is just like Google Calendar or a set schedule and holding those boundaries.
Absolutely. Sometimes just seeing it visually and how it's going to work it can just be so helpful.
Yeah. So now on the opposite end of the coin, so you have the people who are like, okay, I'm really afraid of incorporating any carbs. When someone's like, okay, bring on the carbs, and all of a sudden it's more like cake, donuts, everything else, which do have a carb source, but also have, a blend of fats, and there is sugar involved and everything else. How do you kind of also teach that like we're not opening up the full floodgates all at once, or kind
Yeah.
of keep a proper science to it?
I mean, I think it's just all about balance. And, we didn't have bariatric surgery to say we can never eat fun foods and things that we enjoy and have cake at a party or whatever. But what I would just say is that depending upon your goal and how it fits kind of into your overall intake, how can we fit this in? And there's going to be seasons where it's like, you know what? Life happened and I am off track, and that's okay, and so again, it's about understanding like there's going to be these ebbs and flows and these kind of ups and downs in terms of, being on track, being off track or whatever. But I would just say, if it can fit in, great, be mindful of what we're doing, depending upon, again, what you're training for or whatever. Kind of the amount or the volume that you're going to be having or the frequency might be different based on, what you're taking in for a day, for, week, month, etc., to meet whatever this goal is. But I would say, I always say, everything can have a place. It's a matter of balancing it. And as we're still working towards whatever goal it might be, we may have to kind of scale back sometimes. And there's other times where we're like, it's okay, great, go for it. So I try to have a lot of flexibility there, because I really try to get folks to move away from those really strict food rules and, like, you know what I mean? Struggling with, feeling guilt and shame because they had a piece of cake. It's like, oh my gosh, it's okay. We want to get past that and have a healthy relationship with food.
I always say like any diet works until life happens. And
Yeah.
it's one of those of like, and it's not to knock any other diets, but it's like, okay, keto can absolutely have great success. But what happens when you want like birthday cake, or
Right.
for different reasons and seasons, it
Right.
plays a part? But I think
Yeah.
what really helped me working with you, and why I think registered dietitians really help, is I learned that there is a time and a place for everything. And I think during our year together, There were points where it was like, yes, this is a vegetable plant-based pasta. There are other times where it's like I get to have my grandmom's homemade lasagna.
Totally.
And for me, having clear goals really did help me understand that, like, I may be saying no to the homemade lasagna for now, but it's not forever. And as well, it kind of helps me now when I have to do photo shoots or if I'm trying to tighten up for some certain things to understand, like, look, there's times when I'm going to have like a good legit pizza, and then there's other days when I'm doing like a thin crust, and there's really
Yeah.
no wrong answer to it other than
Right.
when it's not aligned with your goals. And I
Right.
think that's really the most important part, is having kind of some clear goals or understandings of what you want to get out of it, and then just
Totally.
staying in alignment.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that too. When I have folks that are like endurance athletes that are in a heavy training cycle and they're just like trying to find carbs wherever, it's like, okay, hey, maybe they're having, these higher carb foods that they normally wouldn't have the rest of the year. And that's okay because again, it's part of that training cycle. They're eating things that are maybe higher in carb that they would not normally have, other times of the year. And that's okay because again, as you just said, it's part of that particular season's goal. And then we make a change. And I just want to highlight this because I sometimes I get folks when we talk about, oh, we're starting to increase carbs because we have a reason to do that is for whatever they're working towards. We can also go back the other direction if we want to and if we need to for other goals. And that's okay too. So knowing that you can make change, it's okay. It doesn't mean that we're just going up, up, and up. We can make ups and downs throughout this cycle journey, this year, whatever, based on where you're at.
And I think that depending on what sport you do, what season in your sport you're doing, it plays a part. And I think that's the part where when you're interviewed a lot, we always focus on your bariatric part, but the athletic part plays such a big component as well. Based on like if you are going to be strength building compared to like endurance running, what are some considerations when it comes to carbs if you're looking for more of like you're doing a bodybuilding split or even like some powerlifting or some combination of just the average everyday person lifting in their household? How should carbs be incorporated there as opposed to endurance running or
Yeah.
endurance, athletics?
So what I would say, I'll start with the endurance. So endurance training is going to have a higher, more kind of guided carbohydrate goal because
Mhm.
we do primarily need that for the training that we're doing. Whereas with lifting, we absolutely need to continue to focus on our protein because those amino acids are going to be super important for muscle protein synthesis. So meaning muscle building for recovery, to be able to work out hard again tomorrow. Carbohydrates do play a role, especially if someone is trying to put on mass and are trying to be in a caloric surplus, then carbohydrates will play a role there. And what I would just say is if someone's trying to lean out or they're getting, they're really trying to reduce overall body fat, then generally we keep the protein elevated and we will make changes to both the carbohydrate and the fat content of the diet. So I guess the main difference would just be endurance training really will have a focus on carbohydrate throughout the entire training cycle because you need it for daily training runs, for recovery, for, of course, the long runs on the weekends and the race days, etc. And then for bodybuilding, it'll depend upon what your ultimate goal is. Are we in a mass building cycle? Are we we're competing for a show where we have certain aesthetics that we're looking for? That's where maybe then carbohydrates might be changed or reduced at some point, but we always would keep protein higher in those bodybuilding and muscle. And I'll just say too, even for endurance runners, protein's really important too, because you do have to recover your muscle and you want to maintain muscle because a lot of times runners think, carbs are the only thing I need to worry about. No, you do need to take in adequate protein because it's important for muscle recovery so that you can run again the next day. And we don't want to be losing our muscle, like for example, leg muscle when we're doing a lot of running because we're not meeting our adequate protein goals. So it's not that, we don't focus on protein for running. I just want to highlight the really importance of carbs for runners.
I think for athletics and also for any bariatric patient, let's bring the third buddy into the group chat. Like fats play a part too. Like
Totally.
having a approach where you are incorporating all in a level or moderation that reflects your reason and season, I think is really important. And what I think working with a registered dietitian really does make a difference with is understanding that like there are going to be points in your bariatric journey where you might be low carb, low fat, but there should also be clear plans of how are you incorporating, what purpose did they play? Because they do all play a part in living a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah. And I'll just add, for my folks that are really doing a lot of training, there's these concepts out there. It's called low energy availability, which can lead to some real serious side effects and, illness and muscle breakdown and reproductive issues if we're not taking in adequate overall calories, fat, carbs, protein, etc. So when I get folks that have had bariatric surgery, folks don't even think about low energy availability, or like, there's a concept called REDS, which is relative energy deficiency in sport. And those are when you are in a very severe low energy availability, meaning you are expending more than you are taking in. And so you are in a deficit in terms of a whole day. And it can impact your body's reproductive systems, your brain health, of course, your muscle, and so bone density, bone issues, of course. So I don't want to forget that either for my bariatric individuals, because you can certainly, I've had people that have, like, I have women that have lost their period, and that is a problem. That is not normal. That is telling us that there is inadequate energy for our own body's reproductive system to maintain its normal processes. And so we want to make sure too that we're not just going too low when we're increasing our overall, workouts and things. So be mindful of all those things. That's why it's good to talk to someone about it in case you're starting to see symptoms like that.
Sleep, stool, and cycle. I feel like they're the three telltales, but it is also proof of why we can't necessarily go back to our original surgical center requirements, because I think those are very unique to where you were in your bariatric journey.
Right.
But I think a lot of the times when, and I will use myself as the perfect example working with you, I was really hell-bent of, I'm staying at 1,600 calories. I'm working out 6 days a week. Why am I not losing any weight? And I still remember like almost calling you in like the most giddy, frantic part of the first time we increased calories. I lost weight. Like we whooshed like 5 pounds off that first one.
Yeah.
Why does that happen from a scientific perspective or from the nutrition aspect?
Well, I will say, in general, speaking, it's a little different for someone that's had bariatric surgery, because the process of bariatric surgery does change our physiology. It does change how our body works in general. So it's not as easy to just say it's, calories in versus calories out and everyone needs to be in deficit and we'll lose weight. Because for someone that's had bariatric surgery, you have been in a deficit for a significant amount of time. And so as we increase, though, our exercise, your body does need additional nutrients and fueling. And so for you, for example, I think you, in your case particularly, might have just been underfueled for a very long period of time for the amount of activity you were doing. And so when we kind of started giving your body a little bit more nutrition, it was like, hey, cool. Like I have additional, carbs, I have additional protein, I have additional fat to work with here. I can start focusing on certain processes in my body, and it also can allow you to work out harder in your workouts and get more out of a workout, which then can lead to, additional fat loss if that's our goal. But, when we first made our increase, your calories were probably still not adequate in terms of a, ultimate goal. Hey, this is the amount of calories your body just needs every single day. We were just kind of gradually increasing. But I think in terms of the science with it, it's a little hard to explain with someone that's had bariatric surgery, because we have different things that change after surgery, and our overall metabolic rate has decreased after the surgery. So as you put on muscle mass and as you do increase your calories kind of to an amount that your body can say, hey, I can use this for different things, we generally see some changes in body composition. And again, those will be dependent upon your overall, balance in terms of your intake, your sleep, your workout, all those things.
And such an important part of that. I also think like when I would look at my early days prior to you, it was like, yes, I was like living at 1,600, but then it's like Friday might come, I might derail a little bit and be like, oh, I'm back to 1,600 till Saturday afternoon.
Right.
Then
Right.
Saturday night could come. And I think sometimes just a general increase of calories overall during the week kind of also makes there be a little less feeling of restriction around foods, because it was like, okay, I can like find a way to work a cupcake in on a Tuesday at my kid's birthday party. Whereas if you kind of keep this like, I can never have a cupcake again, it sets up for like some really nasty, squirrely logic
Right.
of how you're going to be nutritionally compliant at 12 or 1,600 calories.
Totally. No, I agree with you on that with the big shifts, because I do see that oftentimes, or just not, folks thinking like, hey, I've been eating the same way. I thought, it's X amount of calories, and maybe it's really not. And so then when we have a very clear cut, this is what we're going to eat this amount of calories, and they stay with that consistently, their body kind of understands this is the amount of nutrition I'm getting. And then when we make an adjustment, whether it's up or down, we can see some more response, in terms of body composition changes. So sometimes it's, I agree with you. Sometimes we underfuel throughout the weekend, and then on the weekends, it's like way overfueling. And so now all of a sudden that balance in calories for the week or the month is different than what we might think.
I always say that was my like starter kit of I don't know why I'm not losing weight is like I could be super religious from like Monday to Thursday. And even Friday, I'd have like my portions weighed out, everything comes in. And even if I'm like, I'm going to do like the thin crust alternate pizza, you know, and be like, here's my perfect portion. And then like my wife and kids are having regular pizza. And I'm like, it's just like almost like a thump, 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 like the whole time that box is there. And then it's like, oh, everyone went to bed. It's like, oh, the pizza's still out. And it's like, oh, I had like 3 slices.
Yes.
But it's just funny how there's so much that goes with psychology, understanding nutrition. There's an art and a science to working with a professional. And I've always just really appreciated your approach because it really did come from a place of you always made me feel understood and you've always listened to me. I've enjoyed listening to all the clients that you've helped on your podcast because
Thank you.
it helps keep me in line and remember, you know, how awesome all this hard work can.
Yeah, and I'll just say that everybody that like you're saying, like everybody's different and everyone's on their own unique journey and we all have our own individual goals and lives and needs and training and all these things are so unique. And so I honestly one of the reasons I love having athlete stories on my podcast is because I like for people to share what worked for them. Because sometimes we have all these beautiful calculations and numbers that we think we should aim for. And guess what? Sometimes it doesn't work. And it's like, well, hell, that didn't work. Now what? Like that's what it said I was supposed to do, right? Well, sometimes we can gain ideas from other folks that have worked for them and, you know, and hopefully it's good information, you know, of course I can't say that with a caveat, but you know, sometimes we can learn from others. We certainly can. And in this field, particularly where there's not a ton of research for active bariatric individuals, it is important to have some, you know, hey, what is working for folks out there that are endurance training or that are building muscle in a caloric deficit, basically. How does it work? So I think we can learn from each other for sure.
Definitely, I learn everything when I listen each week and do with everything. We're coming close to the end of the time. I try to close these out by going over my busy method and do rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. Let's go.
You have no pretense on this either because like
I don't.
we just started and we haven't aired an episode yet. So
Yes. Okay.
I'm just going to shoot them at you. Look how happy you are.
I know. I'm like this. Uh-oh. Here we go.
I know.
I'm ready.
So first question. Best habit that a bariatric patient can make in their journey?
Implementing consistency to whatever it is that they are working towards, whether that's being consistent with your workout routine, whether that's being consistent with just trying to have some set nutrition goal. Just being consistent with something is always something that I think you can start with.
Perfect. Okay, U is for understanding nutrition. If you could teach the bariatric community one thing and they actually learned it and everybody just knew it tomorrow, what would it be and why?
Jeez. All right. Well, we're talking about carbs. I'm just going to stay on the carb train. Carbs are important for fueling workouts. If you have activity goals after bariatric surgery, do not be afraid of carbohydrate implementation. It can help you. You do not have to eat 500 grams in a day. You can incrementally increase depending upon your goal and how you're feeling. And that's okay. And even though it might not be something that was recommended out of the surgical center in terms of carbs, if we have different goals from when we had our surgery, then your nutrition needs to be changed as well. And oftentimes that means making the plate a little bit more well-rounded. So I'd say putting in some carbs is okay for people with active goals.
Perfect. S is for staying active. I'm going to go with you on this one. What's your favorite way to stay active?
Okay, I've been lifting. I lift in the mornings. Yeah, I've been going, 4 days a week. I go, my husband and I, in fact, my son too, who's in high school, we lift 4 days a week, 2 upper body, 2 lower body. And then
is the whole Tirapelle clan just up at 4 o'clock in the morning? Like, can we kind of like dive onto this a little bit?
5 a.m. usually, 5:15ish. Yeah, we're usually there. My son works out before school and then we take him to school. But yeah, I would just say lifting for me has been helpful as a woman because I'm going to be honest with you, I'm 45. I am absolutely entering perimenopause and maintaining my muscle. In the old days, I could lift a couple days a week. It didn't matter. And guess what? Shit's changed. I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to swear on this podcast, but it does. And
You're
if
more
I
than
don't,
welcome to.
Okay, if I don't, if I'm not consistent with lifting, I have lost muscle mass 100%. So that has been a new goal of mine in this past year, particularly, has been really putting the effort on strength training.
I wish like if I could teach the world like everything, like mine would be for like perimenopausal, menopausal, the importance as we get older of incorporating resistance training and really working on lifting consistently. Now I am going to pry a little bit more, not on you personally.
It's okay.
Who's the first person up in your house? And remember, this is recorded and this is going out.
Yes, 100% me. That is not up for debate. Yes, I am up. I usually get up. I get a cup of coffee. Right now, I turn my fireplace on. I turn my Christmas lights on my Christmas tree, and I drink my cup of coffee. And I'm usually listening to a podcast. That's what I do in the morning before I start rolling everybody up.
All right, but now I got to ask this too. We're going to dive in because this is just what I do. What do you listen to for a podcast? Like everyone kind of knows what I listen to at this
Yeah.
point. But what do you listen to?
Well, let me get my little list open right here because I'm going to get the right names out. I know I have sent you some in the past in terms of the ones that are like, I like short and to the point ones. Like I'm not one that's going to listen to podcasts that are like an hour long. I like shorter ones.
We're hitting the 51-minute mark. So I
Okay, as
appreciate
we're doing
you
that,
saying
yes.
that you're not going to listen to this part.
I do. So I listen to sports dietitians that talk about endurance training. I listen to the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I also have been listening to Hit Play Not Pause, which is about menopause basically, and active women that are menopausal.
I see what they did there.
And then I listen to other bariatric dietitians. So I liked Dr. Susan Mitchell's the Bariatric Surgery Success podcast. Increase Your Impact with Justin Sua. That's the one. Remember a long time ago I sent you that one.
And I give that to my clients as well because I think a lot of the times it's probably the most concise. Here's what you like. It's almost like everything I like that we didn't do on this one. So we'll have to come back into a 2-minute episode.
Yes.
But it's like, here's everything you need to do. And this is why. Now go do it. And it's like, boom. And it's
100%. I'll also say the Docs Who Lift podcast and also You Are Not Broken with Dr. Kelly Casperson, also good for menopausal women. So I listen to those.
You've inside track with the Nadolskis. Like you have like a whole background with that.
Yeah, wrestling community is it's a small community, but there's a lot of folks out there that are in the wrestling community. So
it is a tight, fierce group.
Yes.
Okay, so we got to the S, and then we'll move it quicker on these. The Y is showing up for yourself. How do you show up for yourself? Like between you're a mom, you own your own company, you wear like 52 different hats. Yeah. How do you show up for yourself?
Honestly, working out for me is a real outlet. When I don't work out, or like I've kind of had a knee issue going on the last month or two, and that's been kind of a bummer. Like I haven't been able to do what I normally do. Like I haven't done leg workouts recently because my knee's been hurting, and that kind of, it's important to me. It makes me feel good. It gives me energy for the day to have that as part of my routine. Honestly, the quiet time I have in the morning when I first wake up and no one's awake is really important time for me. I love having a cup of coffee and watching the sunrise and listening to a podcast before my day begins. It's quiet time. I can think about what I'm doing for the day, and it just kind of sets my day off in a positive way. So those are two of the things that I do. And I like hot yoga too. I'll go to hot yoga classes as well.
We 2 blocks from my house, we actually have a hot yoga place. So we were at like a business, like a local township business thing. And they're like, oh, you should come. And I'm like, oh, I love yoga. And then I did it. And I'm a sweater naturally. I did not realize I was going to look like I wet myself upside down.
Soaking wet.
And
yes.
That's a whole dumpster fire up there.
Yes. It's very moist. It's very moist in there.
And we're using the M word. So
we are.
This is always like the cutout part that we're going to go. All right. You're like, well, we spelt busy. He can't possibly have any more questions for us. But we actually put an exclamation point at the end of it.
Okay.
And we use that for healthy source of dopamine. So what is your favorite healthy source of dopamine besides your morning routine? Since you already used that, we won't let you do it extra.
You know what? It's connecting with people. It honestly, like when we were in person recently at Bariatric Retreat and like other events I've been to, and just even online when I'm talking to people, connection for me is important, especially when you're running your own business and it's virtual and everything's kind of at home and you're by yourself and you're working from home. Connection with people that really are either whatever it is, the same goals that you have or have same life goals or in the same part of life. That's helpful for me to feel like there's other people out there that can relate to maybe things that I'm struggling with or whatever. But that connection and just feeling a part of something is really important for me.
So this is my like big belief and goal is there should almost be like an industry podcast that can only be like accessed by people who have like an LLC. Like there has to be like a password to get in and just like a talk shop. Right. Of what it is like for operating. Because I think you're right. It does get lonely. I think it's sometimes where it's not necessarily like a sitting and crying of, oh, woe is me. But I know I've appreciated working with other coaches where I can just be like, can I run something by you? And I know there's been times where I've outright called you and said, what are your thoughts on this? And it's probably been the best part of, you still picking up the phone for me is like, I know there's someone who gets it, but also who shares it. With everything.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got to the end, and I know you want to get off
Yay.
by the 60-minute mark, but you're
No.
not going to listen to any of this anyway. So this is like the
Will. We're under 60 minutes. And by the way, I will listen to it over 60 minutes, but I tend to try to stay to ones under 60 minutes just because that's like the duration of like my workouts is usually like an hour or so.
Do you ever see like an hour and a half one and be like, oh, f that, like, I am not doing
I'm like,
like,
sounds like this is going to be a 2-dayer. Like I'm gonna have to break this into 2 listening days.
well,
That's
it's
what
like
it usually
I
comes
never
to.
get the 90 minutes to myself, and I'm even doing it at
I
like time and
know.
a half, and I'm sitting there like, what are they doing in
Yes.
this thing?
Or like it's like I'll be driving and my drives are only like let's just say 20, 30 minutes. So then it's like stopping, starting, stopping, starting. And I have to remember where I was in the podcast. You know what I mean? And so that's why I like to try to keep things, brief. But hey, you know
Exactly.
what? When
So
it's good
we are
information, that's all that matters. Yeah.
yeah, we are going to edit out to respect Kim's time. We're not going to share where you can find her or any of her social medias so that we can respect Kim's time on this. But just for editing purposes, if people still want to find you or listen to the end of these episodes, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me. So I'm on Instagram. My handle is Active Bariatric. My website is activebariatricnutrition.com. You can follow me on my podcast, which is the Active Bariatric Nutrition Podcast. And I also have Facebook and TikTok channels. And I do have a YouTube channel where I post the videos of my podcast episodes, the Active Bariatric Nutrition channel. So you can check out any of those.
Love it. Kim, thank you so much for coming on. But more importantly, thank you for always listening to me and putting up with me. Because I
My
know
pleasure.
I'm not an easy one, but I am a fun one when we get to do these. So thank you so much
Absolutely.
for coming on. Now I
Happy
got to
to.
read through my closing stuff. So if you want more from our content, please go ahead and hit subscribe to our YouTube page, Busy Bariatrics, for more in-depth content. If you like this episode, the best way you can help support the show is by leaving a 5-star rating and review. Every week we will be giving away one free product from our sponsors and announcing the winner on our Friday email list. So please be sure to subscribe there as well. If you feel this episode can help someone, screenshot it and drop it in your stories like I do every day for everyone else's, with a link to the episode to help spread the love. And as always, keep getting busy. Thanks again, Kim, for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right.